Welcome back to the Spiritual Download. This is a channel for advanced human development, whether that be personal development or social development. Today I'm interviewing, this is the second part, to Maury Lee.
Hi. Little delay there in my response.
That's totally okay. If you haven't seen part one, I would say go check out part one. In part two here, we're going to start with Maury's experiences with spirituality. And so I'll just have Maury kind of talk about how when he first noticed that maybe there's more to life than just, the mundane everydayness of life.
Well, I'd say it started really early because as a child, I seemed, from what my parents say and what other adults said, is that I seemed to ask a lot of questions beyond my age, or I seemed to have a lot of profound questions when I was really young. And I think my biggest intuitive sense as a child was that I wasn't being told the whole truth, or that people weren't telling me the truth, or that adults didn't really know the whole truth, or they really didn't understand what was really going on, because I always felt that something was missing. And I think a lot of people that end up on the spiritual search as small children feel similarly, that something's missing. They're not getting the big picture, or the picture they're being given doesn't satisfy. And so, it's sort of like in The Wizard of Oz, when they finally pull back the curtain and they see the guy behind the curtain. It's like, I just had a profound need to know what the truth was for me that would satisfy me. And I had a very strong intuition that there was something that I didn't know. And what I didn't know was some kind of a truth that I couldn't, in other words, I couldn't point to something or say, this is what's missing, but I had a very strong sense that something was missing. So it was like the search of what's missing. I didn't know where to look. So what's missing? So my whole childhood, I was always questioning. And then when I went to college, I started, I started out, I was going to major in psychology, but then I found psychology to be so mechanistic and deterministic that I thought, well, the answer is not here. And so I read all the kind of self-help books and, extracurricular, how to improve yourself, how to make yourself better, what'll make you happy, and some philosophy, but a lot of philosophy seemed a little dry for me. Although when I was in college, and I was supposed to take a philosophy course, I actually went into the professor before the course and told him I didn't need it. And so he asked me a whole series of questions and stuff. And he said, oh, you're already a philosopher. I don't think you need this class. And I skipped it. So, but after college, in my mid-20s, I decided that I was really messed up in the head. Now, just to be totally honest, when I was in college, I had severe anxiety and depression. And the anxiety was caused, I know this now, I didn't know it then, but I had a lot of repressed feelings and a lot of repressed pain from my childhood. And I was trying to avoid the pain. And mentally, I thought I could rationalize myself out of the pain or outthink the pain. So my mind was racing all the time because it was trying to somehow figure out how to avoid the pain. And the problem with that is that if you have traumatic experiences, and believe me, I think that people growing up in a normal middle class household, especially a sensitive child, can repress an enormous amount of pain, even though they weren't like physically abused or people could say the parents were bad parents. I think especially sensitive children can experience a lot of mental anguish, and most children can't handle the realization that, say, if they feel like their parents don't love them, they can't really handle that because they're totally dependent on it. So that's repressed. But anyway, so in college, my mind was racing all the time. I was trying to outthink all this pain that I had. So I remember going to the school doctor and I said, well, what do you have for anxiety? He says, oh, well, we have this little pill. So I said, fine, give me some. So I started taking it. I was like, man, this really works. It really, really helped. So he came every 2 weeks. And so I went back 2 weeks later and I said, well, I like this. You got something stronger? And he's like, yeah. So he gave me that. And then 2 weeks later, I went back and said, that was even more helpful. Do you have a stronger? He said, well, this is the highest dose I can give you. And he gave me that. And that really helped. I found out later that that particular drug actually helped diminish my inhibitions. I was a very inhibited person. And so I was inhibiting myself. And apparently this drug helped lessen my own inhibition. So my feelings started coming up. And as I felt them, my mind didn't race as much. And I was probably on that medication for about 3 years. When I got married and settled down and felt more secure, I was able to stop that. But still, I felt into my mid-20s like I'm really messed up. And I got a master's degree in counseling from the University of Missouri. And I started working with an ex-minister who ran Gestalt groups. And Gestalt groups are based on the work of Fritz Perls, German, who developed Gestalt therapy. And what attracted me to Gestalt therapy was that it was experiential. And I felt like I was very stuck in my head, and I was really good at analyzing stuff and thinking, but I wasn't very in touch with my feelings. And so I didn't want to be analyzed. I didn't want a diagnosis. I just wanted something that would force me into experiencing what was unconscious or repressed. And usually in the group, there would be like 8 to 12 people at the group. And in Gestalt work in a group, you get in front of the group in the middle of the room. Maybe there's 2 or 3 chairs, and you role play. And if you say you have a problem with your father, you might sit in one chair and talk as your father, and then sit in the other chair, when you're being yourself, and you'd have a conversation or reenact scenes that might bring up those feelings. And then the therapist would observe your body and your demeanor and push you to try and get into those feelings. And it really worked. And it worked for a lot of people. And so I did Gestalt work for about 10 years on and off. I would go for maybe a year or 2 and then not go for 6 months or a year and then go back.
So this was like your early 30s?
I'd say late 20s to early 30s. More in my late 20s, and then it tapered off. But so I would, since I didn't even trust my own mind, and I wanted to be as pure with experience as I could, I would record my dreams. I kept a tape recorder by my bed. And when I would have a dream, I would, especially dreams that were disturbing, would wake me up. So I would wake up with this dream and I would record it in the middle of the night. And then when I would go to group, I would say, this is my dream. And then I would role play the dream. Sometimes other people might act a part. And I found that that was very good at bringing up stuff that's in your unconscious, because the dreams symbolically represent feelings that are there, but maybe not conscious. So I did that. And then at some point, I read the book, The Primal Scream. Have you ever heard of that?
Just from your previous interview on
Yeah,
back
yeah.
up.
So I don't mind to repeat it because I think it's significant. But I read The Primal Scream, and it was basically saying, but with a lot of scientific evidence, that almost everybody has a lot of repressed pain. You know, even a normal everyday person still has repressed pain, stuff they haven't dealt with. And his explanation was so convincing to me that I can remember by the time that I was finished with the book, I was totally convinced that, yeah, I have a lot of repressed pain. But now I'd already been doing a lot of Gestalt work, so I was opening up and becoming a freer person as a person, just freer with my own emotions and my own shadow. And I remember going to group the next week after reading that book, and I was just laying on the floor in front of a couch, and there was like 12 people there. And to begin the group, you know, just like when we do an interview, you introduce yourself. Well, in the group, you introduce yourself, and you basically tried to make a statement of where you were. So, you know, a person would say, well, I had a good week, or I had a bad week, and I'm feeling good, or I'm depressed, or whatever. And so we'd go around the room so that everybody could be present, you know, so everybody was honestly present and everybody knew everybody else was. Well, when it came to me, I just started shaking my head. And he said, Maury? And I just said, leave me alone. And then all of a sudden, I started wailing. You know, it's like you read about the early American Indians and how the white people that came over said that when the Indians were grieving, or somebody died, or they were feeling sad, how they would just wail, you know. But anyways, my stomach started rolling from way down in my gut, and these wails started coming out, just a very loud wailing. And the sense that I had was that I wanted to be left alone. And the feeling was that all the adults around me as a child had always told me how I should think and how I should feel and how I should be and how I should act. And as a child, all I wanted to do was to be left alone, to be who I was, you know, back to Ramana Maharshi, you know, be who you are. Well, I think the strongest pain of my childhood was that I was never left alone to just be who I was. And that pain was what I was feeling and releasing. And it went on for about 45 minutes, a long time. And I was aware of the people in the room while it was happening, but it was a safe space. You know, like when you go to a therapist, one of the primary conditions is that you have to feel safe to show yourself all the crap and everything in front of this person or this group. And I felt very safe there because I'd seen everybody else work and reveal stuff that was hard to watch or see sometimes, but very therapeutic. And but I was very aware that they all just sat there and listened, like it was so real or so human or something, that they all just sat through it. Nobody got up and left. And finally, when right in the middle of it, the therapist, I remember he said, this is the pain that the human race is afraid to feel. And when it stopped, he asked me if I wanted to share with the group or have them ask me any questions or anything. And I just said no. And I think the point of that was that getting in touch with yourself is what you really need. And other people's opinion of whether you were open or really expressed yourself was sort of irrelevant. And it was very satisfying for me to have felt that, how deeply I wanted to be left alone. And that was a big breakthrough. And after that, I would, wherever I was going, walking around or whatever, and I said, I gave this in my back gap interview, but if I smelled a smell that reminded me of some situation in my childhood that was related to any kind of pain or sadness, it would start to come back. And so I just go back to my apartment and get in my bed and cry or scream or whatever the feeling was. And this was just spontaneous. And it went on for about 3 years. And pretty much, I'd say probably 90% of what the stuff I'd repressed and hadn't felt and hadn't acknowledged in myself sort of was felt. And I'm convinced that the only way you can get free of repressed feelings is to feel them. You know, if you don't feel them, you can't outthink them, you can't out rationalize them. But once you experience them, then they're let go. It's like they're out of the pot, it's done. But until you feel them, I don't think there's another way to get rid of them. I think they're there until you feel them.
This is kind of a philosophy question, but do you think what you're talking about is basically unexpressed karma?
It could be. I'm just good with just repressed feelings. I mean, who knows? You know, it could have been something brought over from another life. I don't know. I don't think so, but I would say that maybe my karma was to go to therapy and experience these feelings and let go of them. And, you know, you brought up in the first part about what is freedom. Well, when you're able to experience repressed feelings and let go of them, you suddenly have a lot more freedom, because all those repressed feelings end up being projected onto other people, and you bring those to other situations, and just messes up your life because you're not seeing the reality of the current situation as it is. You're bringing that baggage with you.
So it's a return to your authentic self, basically.
Yes, yes. And, you know, when I quit the therapy, I continued to, you know, read spiritual books. And when I heard the word enlightenment, for some reason, when I heard the word enlightenment and I heard about this whole nother way of being or responding to life, I was totally captivated by it. So I was reading all, and the first book after the Primal Scream that really affected me was I picked up the book You Are the World by Judeo Krishnamurti, and I started reading that book, and halfway through it I just felt a very strong sense of forgiveness, very, very deep forgiveness for some reason.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean forgiveness? Like from yourself or from the universe? Or
yeah, like from the universe, like I was forgiven, like it was okay. And I think part of it is because even though Krishnamurti can be very hard to understand, and he didn't really have a methodology, so to speak, I thought he was really good at giving you the sense that you are that. And if you are that, and that accepts you the way you are because it created you and allows you to be, that forgiveness was felt. And it was such a strong, and the other thing is I liked so much what Krishnamurti said that I can remember when I was reading his books, I would always be trying to feel like between the lines, like what kind of a emotional or mental space is Krishnamurti in that he could say what he had to say. So, you know, not just understanding what he said, but it's like, what is the space, the feeling, sense of self that he's coming from, that he can say what he said. And so I probably read 30 of his books for about 5 or 10 years. I just read everything. And then I moved on to all kinds of other, everything spiritual I could get my hands on. And David Hawkins I really liked. I never got much out of Ramana Maharshi, but I like Mr Kidada and Ramesh Balsekar, Satyam Nadine, who wrote From Onions to Pearls. And especially when I was reading Krishnamurti, I had a lot of mystical experiences and ecstatic experiences. I mean, just absolute bliss, it's like the most bliss you can imagine. And it would sometimes last for a week or days, and then it would taper off. And to me, that brings up the question of, like, I think there's a big question is enlightenment an experience or is it an understanding? And I think ultimately it has to be an understanding. If it's like you can experience the sun, but to know that it circles, the way it moves in space, and the fact that it's going in a circular motion, it's not coming up here and then, however that is. I think that any experience you have to get the understanding from it or the knowledge from it, so that when the experience is no longer there directly or as intensely, what the experience points out or reveals becomes a knowledge that can't be taken away from you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so is knowledge something, so if it's true knowledge, is it held more in your mind or in your heart?
Well, if it feels true to you and it feels true to your mind, then I think it's acceptable to your heart as well. I mean, obviously you have to have both. I think women tend to like things that are more heartfelt, and they tend to think that the experience of unity and love is the essence of enlightenment. I mean, I see that in a lot of women, and I think that's because of their makeup. I think a lot of men need something that's more intellectual, that they can grasp intellectually, and for them that's truth. But both are important. It's just, I think the emphasis is different.
So like when you read a spiritual book, you feel it in multiple aspects of yourself. You feel it in your mind, in your ego, in your heart, in your body, and kind of beyond your body.
Yeah, I can relate an experience I had when I was younger and I read. I could definitely, I had a sense that where I was reading from was here in my head somewhere. But after a lot of work and realization and getting rid of all those repressed feelings and being more in touch with my heart, then when I would read, I would feel it here. And I think mostly now when I read, the intellectual process is going on, but the center of where I feel its validity is here in my heart. So that was a definite change to where my sense of self was and where I was responding when reading. Like, I think now, like an author I really like who's not very well known is Franklin Merrill Wolff. And he was a Harvard graduate, a mathematician, just absolutely brilliant person. And he was a teacher for a while, and then he didn't feel like that was enough. And so he went off and lived in the Nevada desert and had people come stay with him, and he built a small ashram. But he wrote a book called The Philosophy of Consciousness Without an Object. And it's a very, very abstract, very philosophical work. But when I read it, it just brings me to tears, because to me, it's very beautiful what he's describing and how he describes it. So,
Can you try to describe for us what that really means, consciousness without an object?
well, I think it's referring to awareness. In other words, I think one of the most profound things a person can experience is to get the sense that awareness is not theirs personally. Like we tend to think that awareness is a personal thing that each of us have, and we all have our own awareness. Consciousness without an object would refer to the screen, the blank screen that is awareness. And eventually you come to see that everything appears in this field of awareness, including your own mind and body. You know, this is like if you're aware of your body and you're aware of your mind, then obviously something besides you is looking at your mind, and something besides you personally is feeling your body. So consciousness without an object would be, instead of feeling like you're this person and you have your own awareness, you look deep enough to where you say, well, gee, I can look at my own thoughts, I can look at my feelings. So what is it that's aware of my thoughts and feelings? What is it that's aware of my body? And it's obviously not your body or your mind. It's pure awareness. And pure awareness is a field that's blank, so it has no objects. So he's referring to awareness without any objects, pure awareness. And then when you become aware of your mind or your body or anything else, those are objects appearing in that awareness.
So when you were sleeping during this time period, did you like, when you fell asleep, did you know you were asleep? Or like,
no, I don't think so. You know,
okay.
there's a lot of talk about, if they're enlightened, you don't sleep, or you're aware that you're still conscious when you're asleep. But that's probably just personal. The different people are made up different.
Okay. But like during your dreams, would you experience, would your dreams kind of change the way, versus before you got into spirituality? Maybe your dreams were more kind of crazy, or?
Yes. Yeah. Before I went through all that therapy and letting go of all that repressed stuff, my dreams had all kinds of monsters in them that I didn't recognize, all kinds of made up situations and monsters and things that weren't in my real life. And now my dreams are all there's none of that. If I dream, it's about people, current situations, nothing bizarre.
Yeah, just really normal stuff.
Yeah, just simple stuff, just day-to-day stuff. So that's the dreams definitely changed.
Do you see that your dreams like are happening to like me, or a me, or is it more like it's just kind of like a movie that you're unattached to?
No, most of them feel pretty personal.
Mm.
Most of them do feel pretty personal, because I think, you know, your personal mind is processing stuff that it's going through or dealing with. I mean, some people I'm sure can get visions or feel like they're connected to, I don't know, some channel or something else, and so they can talk about that. I can't, because I don't have that.
So you mentioned that you've had some spiritual or mystical experiences. So they weren't as visual. They were more, what were some of your experiences like?
They were very very emotional. Some of it was physical, and like I've talked about this in the other interview. It's like I would be at work and I would feel cold water. I literally felt like someone had spilled cold water on me, but it was very blissful. I mean, it's like orgiastic. It was like, and I literally thought, God, you know, did I spill water all over me? And because it was like this trickling of water, cool water running all up and down my body, and breathing, just taking a breath was just like, I mean, it was just absolute ecstasy to take a breath. And sometimes that would go on for hours. Now, I was still able to go to work every day and do my work, but this was going on, and I was like totally aware of it. And one time, I was listening to Krishnamurti on a tape, and boom, all of a sudden I was like, there was no me whatsoever, no personal me. And there was just like, without the personal me, there was just this absolute ecstasy, just so much ecstasy that I couldn't stand it. You know, it was too good. And then I think when my ego started to react to that experience, when it started to come back, my ego was like, well, you can't stay here. You can't stay in this state, because if you stay here, you're going to sit in a corner the rest of your life, and you could care less about your family, your kids, your job, or anything, because this is just too good. And so my ego was like, the message was, you know, you got to let this go, because you won't even be able to function, because this is too blissful, you know. And so that ecstatic state then started to drop away. But as it dropped away, I got one of these downloads, and anybody that's had a mystical experience, you get, it's like a download. It's like instant, an instant big amount of information, or a sense of truth. It's not verbal, and it's not really thought, but you just get it in one big boom. And the message was that you have always been surrounded by absolute beauty, and you always will be, whether you realize it or not. And that was a very distinct message. And so it's like saying, you know, even when you're not in this ecstasy, even if you don't realize it, you're still always surrounded by absolute beauty. And I've never forgotten that. It was sort of very clear message. So and I don't experience absolute beauty all the time. I don't, you know, some people are very, very responsive to nature. And if they look at a tree or a flower, they immediately get a very strong sense of, you know, absolute beauty. I don't, but I've been in states where I had that. It's like, I remember going to a fish store where there are all these fish in tanks. And I can remember walking around staring at them. And to me, they were just the height of absolute beauty, you know, just, you know, I had a lot of experiences watching TV, watching a jazz singer or something on TV, and everything was just so beautiful. But I think with most people, that level of ecstasy or beauty, you know, that kind of experience can come and it can last for a while. But I think almost always it ends. And then you're left with, okay, what was that? You know, and I think you can only take it as a way of having knowledge revealed to you, so that, like, now I know I'm surrounded by absolute beauty all the time, even if I don't experience it.
So is absolute beauty, is that different or the same as that with a capital T?
Same. It's perfection. Like living my human life with, you know, if I get sick or get the flu or whatever, life doesn't seem perfect. But deep down, my sense is that irregardless, it's all perfect. It's like you just have that knowing that it's all perfect, even though your own definition of perfect would be, I never get sick, I never get mad, I never get anxious, et cetera, et cetera.
So what was the main reason that you remained a householder instead of kind of running off into like a Zen monastery at that point? It seemed like you kind of had a choice between becoming a Zen monk or keeping a 9-to-5 job and a family and a house.
I think from my childhood, you know, like say when I was in Africa and I was on a missionary compound. In other words, was a like a compound where, say, all the Baptist missionaries that were teaching and preaching in this area of, say, the Congo, there would be like maybe half a dozen families or more of white, you know, missionaries, you know, in this enclave doing that. And so when you're in an environment of like-minded people, even if they're really good spiritual people, there's going to be a drive towards conformity. There's going to be a drive to, well, we're Baptists, so we believe this, and we believe in these things, and this is the right way that Baptists do things. Well, that was an experience I didn't like. And so I equated any kind of an ashram or a monastery or anything like that, however beneficial it might be for a while, you would still be in an environment where there would be some pressure to see things a certain way. And as a householder, I felt like I had the freedom to spend all my spare time reading whatever book I wanted, meditating or not meditating, praying or not praying, you know, believing whatever I wanted to believe, you know, adopting some way of seeing and then letting it go, you know, whereas, and I didn't, and my inner sense, my inner intuition of what truth was, didn't need a particular group or a particular environment to be in. It's just, I think I stayed a householder because I wanted complete freedom. And I never joined a church or anything because I didn't want anyone, you know, telling me I should think or feel a certain way or believe this or not believe that.
Did you ever seek advice from like a spiritual mentor just to see if you have realized like what you like realization?
Yeah, I talked to several teachers. Not really. I went to up to Fairfield, Iowa once when Satyam Nadine, he's not really very well known, but he was a realized person. He was speaking there to a small group, and so I went up there. And I live in Kansas City, and there were some people like Ram Dass came and spoke, and there were some other spiritual teachers that came at spoke, and I was able to go listen to them. And I never felt anything special about being in their presence. And I know that some people say there's such a thing as like some kind of nonverbal transmission. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but I never felt it. I did go out to, Dr. David Hawkins came to Kansas City and spoke at the Unity Church here. And I thought he really blew my mind. I mean, he gave a really, really good talk. And I remember being in line, there was a lunch break, and I happened to be in line just ahead of him in the, or just behind him in the cafeteria. And the handlers, you know, the people that were guiding him around the campus, they were telling him, oh, well, you're the speaker. You don't have to wait in this line, you know, and wait for everybody else to be fed. You can just go to the front of the line because, you know, you're here, you're the invited speaker. And he was like, nah. He says, I don't do that. He says, I'll be and take my place in the line just like everybody else. And I thought that was a real good insight into that he was like a humble person. And I appreciate that. And then I did fly out to California and go to one of his day-long lectures, and I really liked that. But I never felt any kind of I didn't ever feel more seeing these people in person than I did from reading their works. It never was more. It was just as good, and it was nice to see them in person and all that. But it was not. So that's another reason, you know, I never felt like I needed to go personally talk to a teacher. It was like it was enough. But I did email a number of them, and I've had a few conversations with Robert Wolf, who lives in Ojai, California. And I really relate to Robert Wolf because he was a big Krishnamurti fan as well. And he'd studied Krishnamurti very deeply. So that's sort of a clue. If people really like Krishnamurti, to me, that's a clue that their way of seeing things and mine is probably going to click. And I've emailed a few other teachers. In fact, the way I found Nisargadatta, because I read Nisargadatta before he was really well known, and the way I found him, I was on a spiritual forum back in the old days when there was CompuServe. You're probably not.
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, there was, you know, back before the internet was like it is now, and we can have video and talk live and see each other. There were these forums where when the speed was really slow on the internet and you could just do text, I was on some forum, and some spiritual teacher, I think his name was like Kenneth Lloyd Russell. He was some spiritual teacher at that time. He sent me an email and he said, you're actually beyond this forum here. He said, why don't you read Nisargadatta? I think you're ready for Nisargadatta. You should read him. And I didn't even know who he was. And so I went to the local bookstore and I asked them if they had the book. No, they don't have it. They didn't have it, but they could order it from like wherever it was printed, and it would take, you know, a few weeks or whatever. But so I ordered that book. Was it I Am That? The book I Am That, and I got it, and I can remember getting it, and I saw the picture because I'd never even seen a picture of this guy. I didn't know who he was, but just some teacher wrote to me and said, "You should read this guy." So I remember looking at his picture and I thought, and I read the little bio and he only like went to the 3rd grade. And I'm like, wow, this guy looks a little crazy, and he's this ugly Indian guy and has a red dot on his forehead, and I'm going to read him. But I read him, and I thought, I studied that I Am That book for about a year. I mean, I read it every day, read it cover to cover, reread it. I mean, the search was pretty intense for many years.
What does Nisargadatta, what does he offer, or what does he demonstrate?
Well, I think he's one of the really great ones. I mean, he was so pure in his. I mean, he was a householder. He sold cigarettes. You know.
Didn't he smoke cigarettes like all the time?
He smoked all the time and chewed tobacco all the time. I mean, and he was. But you could just tell. I mean, people that are realized, the two things I get from them is they are humble, but at the same time, they have this tremendous authority because it's like the knowledge is just, it's who they are. And so it's not the kind of authority where they're like on a pedestal or they like being the authority. It's just the authority is natural to them, but it's also comes with humility because it's not them speaking. They're just speaking the truth of that, if that makes sense. But I found Mr Kidada very, very, very deep and very satisfying.
Did he help you end your search for truth? Like, did you realize that truth is here?
I think realization comes to different people in different ways. I think some people have been studying this for a long time or whatever, and all of a sudden they have some really big experience that's really profound, and they get a tremendous, big download at that time, and their life has changed completely after that. And they feel like that's when they realized. And I think other people, it's much more gradual, and they'll have little insights and little insights. And finally, when they get the satisfaction of feeling like the search is over, it's not some big bang. And so I think a lot of people have pretty much realized the self before they really acknowledge it. Like they have most of whatever it is that realization is, but they don't quite own it. And it might take them a few more years after they really sort of know it to acknowledge that actually I do understand, that I have realized, you know, I am done. And for me, I had an awful lot of mystical experiences when I was younger, and they were very intense. But as I got older, those lessened. But I kept the search up, and I had a lot of funny insights, because for a long time I felt like I could pick up a book and I could read a few pages and I would say, yeah, this guy's enlightened, I want to read him. I pick up somebody else, maybe a well-known spiritual book, and go, nah, he doesn't got it. And eventually I was like, well, this is really messed up. How is it that something in me knows whether I can read him because he's enlightened and not him because he's not, if I'm not enlightened? You know, I'm not acknowledging I'm enlightened, but I'll pick up this book and say, no, he doesn't have it. Pick up another book and say, oh yeah, he has it. So I was starting to get that kind of a sense that, boy, that's odd. You know, I feel very confident that, yeah, this guy's worth reading because he's really got it, and this guy isn't because he doesn't. So I'm saying, if I can judge that, then I must understand, because how would I know? So, and then I came to the point where I say, well, it doesn't matter whether I'm enlightened or not, because whether I am or not, I am that. And so there was like that kind of going. And finally, what for me just made me relax and say, okay, or no, the search was over, was reading the Robert Wolfe. He still lives in, he's still alive, and he's in Ojai, California. And he's written a number of books. And one of them's free online. It's called Living Nonduality. And it's free off his website. It's like 400 pages. But it was like reading him one night, and I was just like, yeah, I know this, and I know that I know. And so it was just like a big, oh God, relaxation and a relief, and I went to bed. There was no big bang or anything. And ultimately, it's fun to have someone else confirm that you've realized, but ultimately the person that needs to feel like they've realized is the person themselves. You know, they need to.
So what is the difference between enlightenment and the person?
Well, the source or God or the absolute doesn't need enlightenment, because it is everything. It created everything. It's that pure awareness, you know, whatever you want to call it. The only thing that wants to be enlightened is an individual person. And all realization is, or enlightenment is when the individual person realizes that they are that. Doesn't make you a saint. It doesn't make you automatically good. It doesn't take away all your neuroses or whatever else. But it stops the search, because what you're looking for is your true self, your true nature. And once you realize, well, I am that, I can't be anything other than that, and this appearance is just an expression of that, as limited as it is, ultimately I am that. I am eternal. I have always been and I always will be. I'll just play out this expression and trust whatever comes next. And once you realize that, it just relaxes and the search is really over. It doesn't mean you don't have curiosity about it or read more spiritual books, or that you can't still develop as a person or deepen your sense of being that. But basically the search, when you stop searching, you feel like the search is over. That's pretty much it.
Do you think that people search for enlightenment outside of themselves because they feel imperfect? Like, little old me, like, I can't be enlightened. Like, I'm just a regular person.
Yeah. Yes. And there's nothing wrong with that, because there's no way I would have realized I am that if I hadn't read all these other spiritual teachers. But, I was guided, or my seeking sense, that search, that drove that. I couldn't understand. There's no way I could have understood all that I understand now without reading these great sages. There's just no way. Absolutely no way. But ultimately, it's like Robert Wolff says that the greatest stumbling block and the last myth that someone has to get over is the myth of, well, it couldn't happen to me. If you think of Ramana or Mr Kidada or, whoever, it's like, I could realize what they realized. That's the biggest impediment, is that people literally have that sense of, well, I'm just little old me. It could never happen to me.
Maybe part of it is because when people initially get into religion or spirituality, they read about Jesus or the Buddha, and they just seem like incredible humans, or almost like inhuman.
Yeah. So, and I think that, even after someone realizes that they are that there can be levels of that. And I think as a person ages, once they realize they are that the implications of that, the deepening of that still go on. That it's not like you realize you are that and you're done, and you could never have any sense of progression or deepening after that. I think it's just like something clicks and you are that, and that's the realization. But the implications of that, it doesn't make all your shit just drop away just because you realize that. But then you have that insight or that realization, and then you start saying, okay, if I know that, then what about this stuff that I still feel that doesn't seem in alignment with that? And so you can still work with that and still progress. So I think some sages are probably much more profound and much more insightful than others, although you would say that they're all realized. But I still think some are more profound than others.
So what happens to fear when you have more realization?
I think the fear lessens, and I think for some people, the realization is so profound and so deep that any fear of death completely vanishes. But I think there's lots of other people that have the realization, and it's not quite as as deep, and so they might still have some, especially of dying, you know, because it's unknown and we've lived as a person. And so but I think in general, it's like anxieties and fears and disturbances just really less with realization. It just, or I think Mr Kidada and some of those sages used to say that, you know, it's not that you don't think anymore, you just don't harbor them, is what Mr Kidada would say, or that you have the feelings, but they don't have roots, is another thing they say. They just don't have roots. They don't stay. You can get really, really angry, but it doesn't have roots. You don't hang on to it. You don't keep a resentment. You might resent somebody and then you look at it and you go, and you let it go.
Yeah, it seems like as you dive more into spirituality, you see that life is kind of more like moment by moment, and then it just, each moment becomes like cleaner and more clear and more alive, and you kind of forget about all of the crap that's maybe happened in the past, and you just kind of see every moment as fresh. I don't know if you've experienced that or not.
The way you express it, I'm not sure I've really felt it like that, but I've heard other people talk about that. The way I would relate to it is like, before I went through all this, the therapy that I went through and let go of what I had repressed, I would experience, like, if I went into a room where there was a bunch of people, I would project all kinds of crap that had nothing to do with them onto them because of my own mental stuff. And so I would look at this person and say, oh, well, he's dressed like this and he's wearing those shoes, so he's probably a professor and he's probably this. And so he thinks this, and he would react to me like this. And then I look over there and there's a girl in a red dress and she's tall and she's wearing high heels, so she's probably this kind of a person and thinks this. And they weren't talking to me, they weren't giving me this information. It was just all my, you know, mind generated crap and projections. So the point is that my mind was, I just walked into a room with a bunch of people and already my mind was really busy going all kinds of ways and thinking all kinds of things. It was just all my stuff and had nothing to do with the reality of the moment, of just the people that were there. And so, but now if I walk into a room and there's a bunch of people, there's none of that going on. There's just a room with a bunch of people. And if somebody actually says something to me or we start talking, then, you know, I'll respond accordingly to what actually the moment is, instead of bringing a whole bunch of baggage to the moment. So in that sense, the moments are much fresher, you know, about like the way you were saying, the moment is fresh. You're not bringing a lot of crap to it.
Yeah, and it seems like you judge less and less as you develop.
Yes.
We've talked about the word should before. Can you discuss kind of the dangers of thinking in those terms a lot?
I think should be vanished. It's really, should will cause a lot of neuroses and a lot of anxiety, because as long as you're telling yourself, you know, I should be this way and other people should be that way and life should be like this. I mean, just should itself, when you have a lot of shoulds, is going to create a lot of judgment. And if you're judging all the time, you're going to project a lot of crap onto people and onto yourself. And a lot of people feel like if they didn't have all these shoulds and these ways they should act and be, that they would be some kind of an evil, terrible person that was totally selfish or something. But actually, when you let go of all those shoulds, you find out actually you're less judgmental, so you actually turn out to be kinder. And if you're gentler and kinder to yourself and put less shoulds on yourself, and you're not putting yourself down, that translates into how you treat other people. So if you have a lot of personal shoulds, you're going to put those same shoulds on everybody else, and your expectations are going to be really high in all kinds of ways that maybe are legitimate or not. And it's going to cause you a lot of difficulties with other people. Whereas without those shoulds, you just will take people where they are, how they are, and you might react in the moment if you don't like something, or if you do like something, but at least you're not prejudging them. What was it Jesus said? Take the timber out of your own eye before you go complaining about the splinter in somebody else's eye.
Yeah, and I think especially for people on the spiritual path, they judge themselves too. I think one of the big barriers is people judge themselves, like they think that they're maybe bad at meditation. Can you discuss like kind of the strengths and the weaknesses of meditation?
Yeah, I tried meditation many times, but it, you know, and I put some effort into it, but it never did anything for me. It never gave me any kind of satisfaction. It never made me feel any different. I mean, basically, meditation never did anything for me. And I think some of the downsides of meditation is people take it up as, oh, if I schedule myself to meditate once or twice a day or once or twice a week at a certain time, then I'm being dutiful and I'm being, you know, it becomes a chore, it becomes a task. And then if you miss a time, then you beat yourself up and say, well, I didn't meditate on Monday night and I didn't meditate Wednesday night either, so to hell with it, you know. So for me, contemplation is what worked, because contemplation is like meditation, except instead of saying that I'm setting aside a certain part of the day and I'm going to use XYZ method during this half hour or this hour and stick with it. Contemplation is something that you can do all day long. I mean, even in your sleep, because you can take a spiritual idea or principle that you feel is valid or is something that you're interested in or you want to apply to yourself, and you can take that principle or idea and just put it in the back of your mind and go about your regular day going to work. And like, if you go to work, there's going to be all kinds of situations where a spiritual ideal will be challenged, like somebody's really bitchy that day, or somebody's, you know, ate your lunch out of the fridge or whatever. So whatever spiritual principle you have, if you just say, this is what I'm working on now, this is what I want to consider, just your regular day, going to work, dealing with your spouse or your kids, if you have that in the back of your mind, then for the whole day, like a situation comes up and maybe you don't think of that principle that you have right then and you react to a situation. But if you put it in the back of your mind, you know, when that situation is sort of over, then that backdrop of this idea that you're pursuing will be there, and you can say, okay, let me look at what just happened with this spiritual principle that I'm trying to apply to my life. You know, did I really react according to what I think would be a more ideal way to react? Did I, you know, can I do it different next time? Do I want to actually go back and apologize to this person because of the way I reacted? So that the idea of contemplation is, be a householder, go to work every day, have a normal life. But if you have something, you know, spiritual path or principle or ideals that you want to live up to, if you just put them in your mind and want to experience your life as you apply them, situations all day long, every day, will lend themselves to being examined in the light of that principle. And so for me, that's what really worked is just contemplation, which is not a certain time, not a certain place, not in a certain way. It's just taking that natural spiritual inclination you have and pick a primary principle that you think is part of what you see your spiritual development to be, and just put that in your mind and think about it on the bus when you're going to work or driving your car, or how you react to someone who cuts you off in traffic. And so you don't need a certain time to meditate. And you don't have to set aside a certain period and tell your friends, no, I can't talk to you now because I got to meditate. But I'm not knocking meditation. I think for some people, it's the best thing they ever did. They swear by it and they love it, and that's their way. It just wasn't my way.
What about, what do you think about people who are trying to turn off their minds, and maybe they're assuming that thinking and mind is maybe an impediment to their spiritual growth rather than actually maybe their strength?
I think that's ridiculous. I think, you know, there's a saying that the result isn't the prescription. You know, there's that saying, the result isn't the prescription. So what it is, I think when you realize your mind quiets down so much that it's almost like your mind is stilled. And so people take that result and they say, okay, that's the prescription. I need to still my mind or stop my thinking. It doesn't work like that. It's like when you develop a deep trust that everything is in perfection and things are the way they are supposed to be, whether I like it or not. And when you accept that you are that, and the realization deepens, what happens is your mind really, really quiets down, because you don't have all this repressed emotional baggage going on. You don't have all this self-doubt going on. You don't have all these shoulds that you think you should be doing. And the result of that is just a very, very quiet mind. Like when I would be at work, one thing I realized very strongly is so many people, they would be working on a certain task on their computer or whatever, and 5 other things would be going on in their mind. They would be working, but they would be thinking about what their husband said or their wife said, or what this, and whatever I was doing was the only thing I was doing. There was nothing ever going on. And my mind now, compared to what it was when I was young or growing up or in my 20s, my mind was racing all the time and having all kinds of random thoughts and rushing around. And now it's pretty blank most of the time. But that's the result of the work and the realization. It's not the prescription to say, oh, well, just stop thinking, stop your mind, kill your mind, and then you'll be at peace. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it seems like Zen is probably starting from the end.
Yeah, and I'm not knocking Zen, but I don't think really anybody, I mean, I wouldn't tell anybody that my mind is dead, you know, that I don't think. But I can say in comparison to where my mind was before, it's quiet. It's very quiet. It's very spacious. Whereas before, it's like it was just nonstop chatter, internal arguments, blah, 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 blah. And now it's just like, it's just very, very quiet. If I want to think about a certain something, that's all that's going on. And, you know, I can follow a train of thought and it's not going to get interrupted.
Do you think another obstacle is people are stuck in their belief systems? Like maybe they're really stuck in being Republican or really stuck in being Democrat, or stuck in one particular religion?
Yeah. Especially, you know, politics and religion. It's like, if I think anybody in any religion, if they went deep enough, if it doesn't matter which one, if they went deep enough, they would realize the self. They would realize that they are that. I just think that Hindu sages pretty much nailed it better than anybody else. And they have tremendous thousands and thousands of years of refining this, and with little techniques and insights and teachings that really help you get there. In fact, I probably realized that I was that, or had a strong sense of that, long before I would admit it to myself. And the last thing that I did was that I said, well, if I want to know that I'm enlightened, now that I've read all this spiritual stuff, there's thousands of different definitions of enlightenment. This guy says it's this, and this guy says it's that, and these two don't agree and whatever. So I'm like, okay. So the whole idea of enlightenment came out of India, and it arose thousands of years ago with these ancient rishis and sages and whatever. So my final real search was, okay, I want to find out what these original Indian sages said enlightenment was, because that's where it originated. Those are the guys who coined the phrase. These are the guys that developed the methods. What do they say it is?
So you would say like Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta, they're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, per se?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's and the lineages are somewhat different, and they realize the same thing. But I think there's a lot of really, really, really great teachings that were in place long before Nisargadatta and Ramana Maharshi.
What about in Western philosophy? Like, I was a philosophy major in college. Do you see any really deep insights coming out of just like if you majored in philosophy in college?
I think that would help. That would help. I've tried to read Kant, and you've probably been able to read Kant, but and a lot of spiritual people refer to him. And I've tried to read Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard I can't stomach at all. Kant, I don't, it didn't hook me, but more spiritual philosophy has more of that bent, like the philosophy of consciousness without an object by Franklin Mara Wolf. To me, that's very philosophical, but it's really deep. But I don't know if you watched, there was a video I linked to from my blog by Tamaji, and he was studying the philosopher Husserl. Did you ever hear of him?
I haven't heard of him or her, no.
A German philosopher, Husserl. And he was practicing his type of meditation called reductive something. And boom, he had this deep, profound awakening. And
it sounds like the neti method, kind of.
Yeah. The neti thing is just, it's just like, you're not this, you're not this, you're not this. And when you get rid of all the objects, what are you? Pure awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all neti is doing, is coming to the conclusion that you are that pure awareness without an object. And therefore, because you are the screen, anything that's created appears in the screen. So I like to say that, like Ramana Maharshi used to say, okay, there's the screen, the movie screen, and then the characters appear on the screen, and they do their parts and have all these activities and emotions and stuff, but the screen is unaffected. But the screen is the background. It's pure, it's white, and the light dances on the screen and you get to see the movie. But Ramana's pointing out that you're the screen. You're not any of the characters on the screen. You are the screen. You're not Kyle. You're not Maury. You're not Jane or John. Ultimately, you are that screen, and the play's going on and you're watching it.
What do you think about the metaphor of the waves and the ocean?
It's the same thing. You're not the individual person. You are that, the ocean, the everything, the all, the essence. You're not the wave. The wave is just an appearance. It was water before it was a wave, and when it dies down, it's still water. You don't disappear. Same. They're all pointing to that same thing.
Okay. Any last advice or words for people who are on this spiritual journey, spiritual path?
I would say trust yourself. The search that you're on is nobody else's search but yours, and your search is going to be different from everybody else's, and the resolution of your search is probably going to be different, or the path to the end is probably going to be different. And so I would just say, trust your own intuition. If you want to do meditation every day and set a certain time and that works for you, then do it. Trust yourself. If, going to a monastery is what really appeals you and is as satisfying and rocks your boat, then go do that. If you're being a householder and being a contemplative all day long while you do a normal life is attractive to you, then do that. In other words, trust yourself, because the search that you're on is yours alone, and only you can satisfy it by going deep enough.
All right, that sounds like a good conclusion. So we'll put this video maybe on your Facebook page, and then I'll probably link it to my Facebook as well.
Yeah, it'll probably be tomorrow or something, right?
Yeah, it'll take maybe a day or two.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any way that if someone's really interested in what you're saying, like if they want to contact you, how can they contact you?
Well, my email address is on the blog, No Maury, or Enlightenment for No One. If they just type in Google Enlightenment for No One, they'll find my blog and my contacts on there.
Okay, I'll probably put the link to on the bottom of the video so that they can check that out for your blog, and then your email will be on your blog. So, okay. All right. Well, thank you, Maury.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.